One of the most common ideas in cinema is the conquest of our planet by another intelligent civilization. Aliens love Earth for its natural resources, its abundance of liquid water, its atmosphere, and the perfect star at the center of the system. What they don't love, however, is humanity. As a rule, enormous spacecraft arrive and lay siege to the planet. The invasion begins suddenly, and humanity is unprepared to fight back during the first days of the war. But Pacific Rim breaks away from this long-established concept. The alien invaders act far more rationally. They don't waste time on a long journey through space. They don't send fleets of ships. They don't spend resources on a massive invasion force. In fact, the aliens don't even take part in the fighting themselves. Instead, they created a portal and sent through enormous kaiju, their biological weapons, monsters engineered and programmed for total annihilation. Now those are some smart invaders. The film is genuinely very well thought out, but even while watching it, a huge number of questions still come to mind. Why don't the Precursors send a kaiju every minute? Why did they open only one portal instead of 10? And what do we actually know about their world and their home planet? The amount of information provided by the film and the screenplay is fairly limited. We know that 65 million years ago they already attempted to conquer Earth, but at the time they didn't like the planet's climate or the composition of its atmosphere. So why not simply terraform the planet? What really happened 65 million years ago? And why did they have to wait so long before trying again? There are a lot of questions, and I've only mentioned a few of them. But the truth is, this universe actually provides answers. And most importantly, it provides an explanation. So if you want to learn the full story, then welcome aboard. So, first, we need to learn everything we can about the invaders' homeworld, their history, and their motives in order to understand the reasons behind their actions. The highly advanced civilization known to us as the Precursors is far older than humanity. They were among the first living organisms in the universe and learned how to control matter, space, and time. By the time the events of the film take place, the Precursors no longer have a true home planet. Over the course of their rule, they created an entire network of worlds that included thousands of conquered planets. At the height of their development, the aliens realized that traveling across galaxies using spacecraft was highly inefficient. Even at the speed of light, such journeys could take millions of years. It was far more practical to create a controlled portal that could provide access to any point in the universe. A portal, not a wormhole. Because they operate on different principles. A wormhole allows travel in both directions for anyone who can access it. A portal, on the other hand, can be opened and closed at will, allowing its creators to control the process of travel and eliminate the possibility of unwanted visitors getting through. But creating a portal presented two major problems. The first was time. In different regions of the cosmos, time flows differently, and the difference can be enormous. The best example of this was shown in Interstellar. 1 hour spent on Miller's planet is equal to 7 years on Earth. Time was the first challenge. The second was the amount of energy required. Opening a portal was not the problem, but controlling it and maintaining a constant connection with the other side required an enormous amount of energy. The solution was found in the form of a Dyson sphere. This method of harvesting a star's energy had been perfected. At its center was a star, surrounded by a massive ring-shaped megastructure. It allowed them to collect the energy needed to open and stabilize the portal. The Precursors solved the second problem, time, with the help of a controlled black hole. It not only absorbed infrared radiation, but was also capable of distorting space and time. Exactly how they managed to create such a black hole is unknown. Perhaps they use naturally occurring black holes that already exist in space. Perhaps they create their own. There is no information on that, but this entire superstructure allowed the Precursors to travel across the cosmos in search of suitable planets. They didn't waste time on terraforming. It was much easier to find a planet that was already suitable. And in the universe, there are an infinite number of them. After hundreds of millions of years of development, the Precursors had mastered every branch of science, including genetic engineering. As a result, they used enormous creatures as their primary military force. Known to us as the Kaiju, these giant monsters were created from scratch. Their DNA was programmed, including instincts for self-preservation and reproduction. They were simply biological weapons with a shared collective consciousness. After conquering another world, a portion of the Precursors would colonize the planet and construct a new Dyson sphere with its own star and black hole. Once that was done, the portal would be stabilized and the newly conquered world would be integrated into the system. In other words, the Precursors exist within a created network where time flows uniformly. Black holes were used to maintain a single timeline, portals were used for transportation, and the Kaiju were used for war. This general understanding of how their civilization functions helps explain many of the apparent plot holes in the film. First, the lifespan of the Precursors. According to the screenplay, the lifespan of a Precursor is measured in millions of years. This is primarily due to the unique flow of time in their world. In other words, they slow time down to such an extent that a single year on Earth may be equal to 1,000,000 years within their network. There is no exact information about the ratio between these timelines, so we can only speculate. But even that gives us the main answer. We already know that the aliens first attempted to conquer Earth 65 million years ago. The Kaiju were responsible for the extinction of the dinosaurs, but Earth's atmosphere was unsuitable for their biological weapons. The Kaiju died too quickly, and the composition of the air, as well as the chemical properties of the water, was unsuitable for the Precursors themselves, at least on our planet. So while an enormous amount of time passed between the two attempts to conquer Earth, only a few hundred years may have passed in the world of the Precursors. Do you remember Dr. Herman's observation? He noticed a pattern in the appearance of the Kaiju. At first, the breach opened every 24 weeks, then every 12, then every 6, and eventually it would reach the point where Kaiju would begin entering our world every minute. The reason for this is the difference in the flow of time. When the portal opened, time moved differently on each side. In the Precursors' homeworld, they were sending Kaiju one after another. But on Earth, time flowed differently. That's why there were intervals between Kaiju arrivals, enormous gaps in time. But then another question arises. Why did the interval between Kaiju arrivals continue to shrink over the course of 12 years? Because when the Precursors opened the portal in 2013, they immediately began adapting their world to Earth's. Using the black hole, they were creating a single shared timeline. And over the course of 12 years, the aliens completed the synchronization of the two worlds, causing time on their planet and on Earth to flow at the same rate. That's why they couldn't send a horde of Kaiju right away. The difference in the flow of time prevented it. At first, the Precursors were limited in what they could do. They were preparing for war, sending scouts, gathering data, wearing humanity down, and strengthening the connection between the two worlds. The early Kaiju carried no significant weapons in their arsenal. The later ones, however, were true warriors, and that also helps explain how Raleigh survived. When he entered the Precursors' homeworld, Raleigh managed to destroy everything and eject before the explosion. If Raleigh had been in a different point along the timeline at the moment of the blast, his escape pod might have been found days or even years later. But that didn't happen, which means that by the time of the explosion, the synchronization of the two worlds had already been completed. However, the Precursor still hadn't achieved full portal stability. In other words, the stage of complete connection had not yet been reached. The aliens had only just begun the final phase of their preparations. A defensive force was gathering around the breach, waiting for the connection to become fully established. Once that happened, hundreds of Kaiju would have arrived on Earth to finish the job. In the film, the Jaeger team managed to close the portal in time, but if they had failed, the consequences would have been catastrophic. It turns out that the aliens cannot use the portal at its full capacity until a certain point. If a single portal requires that many resources, they simply wouldn't have enough energy to open a second or a third one. There's another question that gets asked quite often. Why did the breach open at the bottom of the ocean? First, it provides natural protection. The location is too deep to allow easy access or detailed study. Even if humanity managed to build a laboratory on the ocean floor, the first kaiju to emerge would destroy it. You may also notice that the atmosphere of the Precursors' homeworld appears to be liquid. There is water inside the breach, and the aliens themselves seem to live in a water-based environment. You can see this from the air bubbles leaking from the hull of Gypsy Danger. Small droplets of water are also visible inside the Jaeger's control room. The breach opened in the ocean because the aliens themselves are aquatic creatures. Their anatomy resembles that of mollusks. From their perspective, Earth is a paradise. After all, 70% of the planet's surface is covered by water. On top of that, kaiju can move much faster underwater. Once they come ashore, they become clumsy because of their enormous mass. But in the ocean, they can hide at great depths and remain undetected for long periods of time. In interviews, director Guillermo del Toro stated that the monsters are poorly adapted to Earth's gravity and are unable to survive for more than 6 months. Creatures of that size require an enormous amount of food. The moment a kaiju emerges on Earth's surface, it is already doomed to die. If a kaiju doesn't die from starvation, it will eventually die from exhaustion. Because of their immense size and weight, the monsters cannot sleep. If a kaiju were ever to fall asleep, its internal organs would be crushed under its own mass. That's why every punch, throw, and impact delivered by the Jaegers can be deadly to a giant monster. Internally, they are far more fragile than they appear. Externally, however, these biological weapons are extremely well protected. Conventional firearms are useless. They don't even leave scratches and are incapable of penetrating the kaiju's thick hide. We know that all kaiju are essentially clones of one another. They share the same DNA, and the Precursors breed them as their primary military force. But the most important detail is that all kaiju share a single collective consciousness. Unfortunately, the film never really explains how this works. In order to preserve and manage the memories of every kaiju, there must be some kind of biological supercomputer, an intelligence capable of communicating telepathically, issuing commands, and storing vast amounts of information. But how exactly does that connection work? When the biologist Dr. Newton Geisler entered Adrift with a portion of Titan's brain, he saw more than just the memories of a long-dead kaiju. He also witnessed events that took place 65 million years ago. I'm not entirely sure how this connection works across such vast distances between two different worlds, but the answer may be hidden within the breach itself. When Gypsy Danger entered the breach, we could see that the mechanism responsible for transportation was organic, a massive living organism. I believe that this is the biological supercomputer through which the telepathic connection operates. The signal coming from the Jaeger passed perfectly into the command center located within the breach itself. That central system received all transmissions, but the moment the Jaeger reached the Precursor's planet, the connection was immediately lost. This may be how every kaiju transmitted its memories and received orders from the Precursors. The breach is also capable of telepathic communication. Once again, it is essentially a living organism, just like the kaiju themselves. The film also tells us that different monsters entered Earth. No two kaiju were exactly alike. Their DNA and overall biological structure may have been identical, but their characteristics, weapons, and mass were all different. When we're shown the Precursor's planet for a brief moment, we can spot at least 3 knifeheads and several mutavores. In other words, the invaders produce multiple individuals of the same type. Most likely, this is connected to their invasion strategy. I believe that this planet is just one of many military laboratories, each following a specific approach to conquest. All kaiju pass through the breach in a strict order, based on their category and level of strength. The weakest are sent first, the strongest are held back until the end. As a result, the resistance is given the illusion that it is winning. It was this illusion that led to the Jaeger program being shut down. Humanity began to believe in its own strength, and that became the main reason behind the construction of the wall. A wall that, in reality, had no chance of standing against Category 3 and Category 4 kaiju. The fact that we were shown multiple identical creatures suggests only one thing. The Precursors are constantly at war. After conquering one planet, they move on to the next. Or there's a second possibility. Once the breach becomes fully synchronized, all the kaiju being held on the planet are sent to Earth in one continuous wave. In other words, they are being held in reserve for the main assault. When the second film was released, the overall concept was altered somewhat. The idea of the Antiverse signature was introduced, along with the notion that the collective kaiju consciousness functions everywhere and at all times. On top of that, portals could now be opened from Earth's side of the connection, not just one, but 17 at once. Many of the things that were at least somewhat understandable in the first film were set aside in the sequel. Of course, the first movie isn't perfect either, but I'm not here to criticize it. I'm here to help make sense of it all, and I hope I've managed to do that, at least in part. If you still have questions, I'll be waiting for them in the comments.